I want to demo two tools that I've been working on. So the first one is called projen. Projen's not mine, but I wrote a library on top of projen, which is basically a project scaffolding tool. So it can generate boilerplate code for projects. And the cool thing about projen is that unlike tools like cookie cutter or PyScaffold or basically other templating tools, templates that are created with projen never go out of date. So let's say that you're a platform team and you generate a really great Python project template and you're creating repositories for it, and all the data scientists and data engineers in your company are using this really awesome template. But let's say that your template makes certain assumptions that aren't true later on. So for example, when you first create the template, you might be using GitHub Actions for your code releases. And so what if one day you decide you want to move away from GitHub Actions to AWS Code Build, so just a different CI system? Both of those tools use YAML files. So one uses the GitHub Actions YAML file, the other uses a build spec YAML file. If you're a platform team and you want to make that switch, you could totally research and write the YAML file, but when it comes time to migrate the legacy projects that use the old version of the template, most of the time what teams have to do is go in one by one and and manually swap out the old YAML file for the new YAML file. And in my team's experience, um, you would think that you could just communicate that to all the data scientists and all the data engineers and make some announcement on the company chat saying, "Hey guys, can you please make these few changes in your projects?" But we found that ultimately we had to explain things to people over and over again. People had questions, and ultimately we did end up having to get hands on with a ton of projects. So the migration process from template v1 to template v2 was super manual. And because of that, we've been really gun shy. And so now every time we want to make improvements to our template, we're like, oh my goodness, we feel so much pressure to get all these changes and research into the template before we roll it out, because we know that if we roll it out, then we might not be able to change it again. So the cool thing about projen is that if you use it correctly, you can actually roll out releases automatically without having to communicate that to other engineers. So, for example, if you moved from GitHub Actions to AWS Code Build, you can do that automatically. You register the GitHub Actions YAML file with projen, and then one day, your projen template v2 or vn plus one just disappears that GitHub Actions YAML and just replaces it with the build spec YAML. And there's a million things that can apply to. So you don't have to feel the pressure to sort of modernize overnight. Instead, you can modernize incrementally, and you can feel fine that you don't have the perfect combination of all the perfect tools configured in a perfect way today in all your projects in your project template. You can just you can iterate to that over time and have the confidence that you'll be able to propagate those changes to all of your projects. Okay, so that's projen. And then the other tool that I've been working on, is a tool called Repo Gen, which is a very thin wrapper around an infrastructure as code tool called Pulumi. And this is like projen, but it's not for the actual code files itself, it's for the repositories. So this is a POC that we're doing with GitHub. And the idea is that when you want to create a new project, you do often want to generate code files from a template, but there's also a whole bunch of configurations you need to do to the repository itself. For example, you need to configure access permissions, like which users in the company or which teams in the company should have access, or what level of access, like read or write or admin, to a repository. And there's also a bunch of build secrets you probably need to set, or branch permissions, or merge checks, like whether or not CI passed before the branch before merges are allowed to go through. And there gets to be so many changes that the process for setting up a new repository can take a long time. This is actually one of the biggest pain points that my team has right now. So what RepoGen does is not only does it generate repositories, so it automates the repository problem, but it also invokes the Fido projen plugin that I made that also generates the boilerplate code. So now for the demo, and we'll see how it works. So this is using GitHub Actions. So I will click on this Actions button here, and a single like build definition in GitHub is called a workflow. So I've written a workflow called Run RepoGen, and workflows in GitHub Actions actually allow you to define forms that you can fill out with various inputs. So I have a form here, and we can create a new repository. So we'll call it Awesome Deep Learning Project, and we'll use the create repo subcommand of repogen. And let's run it. Okay, so you can see from the previous builds that it takes about a minute to run. So while it's running, I will show you this organization. So before the demo, I already created a repository and I called it Cool New ML Project. So now what I'll do is I'll copy the name of that repository and I will also use my form to delete that existing repository, which by the way, I would probably disable that. If this weren't a demo, I'd probably disable that subcommand. But by the way, if you ever do delete your repos, there's a deletion policy you can set that instead of just cold deleting the repo, it actually archives it so you can get it back if you're worried about that. Okay, so paste in the repository name, and then we will run destroy repo and run the workflow. And that is it. Oh, look. Okay, yes, the previous one's still running too. So now we have 2 builds running. So while these are running, I'll just say that this could be a game changer for engineers starting new projects. Okay, all right. The build just finished. But yeah, basically the friction to starting a new project, it could, like in some of the cases we've seen, starting a new project, it can take a week to start a new project. I mean, if you don't have standards of what your project template should be, maybe you don't know how to set up unit tests, or you don't know how to set up linting, or you don't know how to define a GitHub Actions file, so you'll probably want a template for that to standardize on. And if you don't know how to configure a repository, and then you do some back and forth to get all the CI working and stuff, we've seen that take a long time. So this theoretically makes that, I guess, less than a minute if you know what UI to go to. Okay, so now we'll go to the workspace. Cool new ML project should be gone when I refresh. It is gone. So the delete succeeded, and awesome deep learning project is created. So let's look at it. Ta-da! It's a repository, and it even has this message that shows that when this code was being generated, it knew the inputs that we placed in. So you can imagine picking between different template types in the form. So maybe you're looking for a deep learning training job using the Metaflow model training framework, and maybe you have a template for that logs the experiment results to a experiment tracker like MLflow. So you could check a few boxes saying like, I want Metaflow, I want it to be GPU enabled, and you could generate the project that way. Or maybe you want a fast API app, and so you say, I want a fast API app, and it generates a boilerplate fast API app for you with the platform team's accepted best practices. So that's the tool.